KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Talbot Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you, my friend?
I'm a genie in a bottle. I'm gonna rub you the right way.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
Speaking of, because this is the first time we're recording since, Paulie Walnuts died. R.I.P. R.I.P.
So sad. What a loss.
He was pretty young. He was in his 70s, I think.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. When I would see him do interviews and panels and stuff after The Sopranos, so relatively recent, like in the last decade, right? He seemed a little off, and I don't know. I can't speak to. It could have just been, old age starting to set in or something. But there seemed to be something wrong with him. And then if he was in a panel with co-stars and friends, it seemed like they were kind of kowtowing to him a little bit, in a way. So I'm not sure if there was anything wrong, but I don't even, it's funny. It's a sin. I don't even know how he passed. How did he go?
I'm looking now.
Yeah.
This is actually Paulie Galtieri's wiki page. I'm looking for Tony Sirico. All right, here we go. Because I was looking through it. It's longer than his real one.
Is it really?
That's the whole thing. Remember, I used to love that website, Something Awful, and they would compare real Wikipedia pages with Wikipedia pages for fake things. So it would be the Wikipedia page for a black hole, but then the Wikipedia page for a black hole in some Marvel comic book, and it's twice as long. I used to love that. I don't know if they do that anymore.
That just speaks to pop culture, doesn't it?
But let's see, personal life. He lived in an assisted living facility.
Oh, okay.
3 weeks before his 80th birthday. No cause was given, but he had been diagnosed with dementia some years before his death.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense, because you could kind of see it. Dementia, we're no strangers to that in our family. Our grandmother suffered from that. But yeah, there was definitely something off. The thing about Tony Sirico is, he was around for so long. I think he has some sort of criminal past, but then he's been acting since the late 60s. He would do voiceover for animated characters and Bakshi films and really B-grade stuff. To see him do a character later in his career that just took off and just transcended anything else he had. I mean, that's how he was known, even though he had a laundry list of parts way before Sopranos. I mean, it was a glint in anyone's eye. So yeah, it was sad. It's definitely sad to see him go.
Sorry, I'm coughing over here. Went down the pipe.
But the O will be an ongoing tribute.
Right. Well, because I was going to say, other than Tony, maybe Dr. Malfi. Is he the most iconic character from the show? I mean,
I think so. In many ways, I do think so. Yeah. I mean, you have Silvio too.
And he's iconic. Sil was iconic because he's awesome, but he was iconic also because he's in the E Street Band. So people wanted to always, that was always the big piece of trivia. It's he's in the E Street Band. I'm yeah, it's season 4. I know.
Double threat.
Yeah. So yeah, it's sad to see him go. A lot of people wrote into me about that when he died. I'm I saw. I mean, and I'm glad that Dustin, our executive producer, he had watched Sopranos for the first time just months ago and started getting. He really loves it, and so he got to kind of see it and enjoy it. But the shitty thing, of course, about Sopranos fandom remains the very fact that we just can't get more in terms of a sequel.
Right.
Not only because I think that they killed him at the end of the show, but because of the death of James Gandolfini. So R.I.P. there. But what's going on in your life, Dake? How's everything going?
It's so funny. Helene just brought something up to me right before we started the show, and I wanted to talk about it, but because it's hilarious, but I'm going to save it for the next episode. What I've been thinking about this week, and I talked to you about not feeling that great yesterday, I've just been going through this thing, dude, of just uncharacteristic laziness. It's pretty weird for me to feel this way. Not that I don't go through my lazy spells and I feel a little malaise or I feel like I just want to lay around and just relax. I certainly have that component to my personality, but just more so than ever. But here's the twist. the laziness doesn't manifest itself in inaction. I still work. I still have to carry on and do all my tasks, right? Food shop and take care of the yard and water the flower. Just all the things we all do, right? Take care of a house, help take care of a family as part of a team over here, Team Moriarty. But yeah, dude, I just feel this. It's almost an emotional or mental laziness. And I don't even know what I want. Like, I'm not fantasizing about laying on the beach in some tropical locale. I'm not fantasizing about just laying around on the couch and watching Mad Men over again. Like, I don't know what I want. I think really my best guess is, and I can keep you guys posted on how this evolves, but I really think this is part of my sort of beta midlife crisis that I've been going through over the last probably better part of a year or so. And I don't, I have so many questions.
You're in the pocket right now.
I am. I definitely am. I mean, now being 48, let me ask you this. Being 48 years old, does this mean I'm going to live till I'm 96? I know damn well I'm not going to live till I'm 96.
You might. I think we might. I'm going to let you finish because I have something associated to say with that, but it's going to be a whole diatribe. So
I'll tell you. I have it's a kind of a strange thing to talk about. I wanted to bring it up mostly because I think it's funny, but also I have just as many questions as I have answers. I have no idea what this feeling is. It also kind of affects my creativity a little bit, which is probably the worst part for me. It's hard to turn the other cheek when I feel like my creativity is suffering and I can't even come up with a funny Twitter post or something like that. Now, my creativity comes in waves. It sort of peaks and valleys. It's always kind of been like that. Maybe it's like that for a lot of creative people. I guess we're all different. I don't know. But that's what I take personally is that, wow, this feels like I have all these ideas, but I'm hesitant to pull the trigger on doing a drawing. Like it's kind of this tentative thing that I'm going through. And I'm just trying to kind of ride it out. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, what is going on? And then I try to be introspective and it doesn't work. And that gets aggravating. So I think the best strategy is just let it kind of ride out, let it play out. As I'm aging and things are changing, my body's changing, my psyche, I guess, is going through whatever it's going through. All right. So give me brass tacks. What's your input here?
Well, yeah, I have two things to say. First of all, I feel a similar way. I don't think it's for the same reasons. I don't know what it is, but just I don't know what the right word is. Like I feel not listless. Like I feel like I just kind of exist in a way a lot. And I too find that I am it's not lazy because I get my things done. It's very similar where if I just went into lazy mode, it would actually make me more anxious. So I can never go into that mode because then things that are, because I always tell myself, oh, no matter how fucked up you are in your head, at least your bills are paid, stuff like that. So if you start going down there, then I'm going to get into like the more existential area. But I feel in my own life recently, and I don't know if it's because of the meds I'm on or whatever the case might be, where I just kind of am bored. And no matter what I do, I don't really want to be doing it. I think it's a lot of why like my G.I. Joes are not totally set up. I play video games, but I'm kind of just play them for an hour or two and then go walk away and do something else and walk around the house. And I just feel like I have no focus. And I'm wondering, I didn't feel this way when I was a kid at all. And I feel like there's a lot of overdiagnoses of everything. However, I also admit that my own depression and anxiety was greatly helped by medication. However, that might have also tweaked me in some way. And so I might be less, my innards might feel less strained, let's say, but I don't have the focus anymore that I used to have. And like not the drive, because I get everything done. I don't know how to explain it. I guess I didn't really anticipate talking about this. It's just this idea of I'm almost waiting for time to pass. Like I wake up and I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes I have a lot of things to do. But sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. If I have a day off, it reminds me a lot of when I worked at IGN in 2007, 2008, when I first moved there. And I didn't really have any friends. I didn't really have anything to do, where weekends I was like, I wish it was like Monday when it was like Friday night so I can just get back to it. And I feel like that now. Like, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know where to be. I don't have to be anywhere. And I'm kind of just waiting for like time to pass during the day so I can like go to bed. It's like, oh, 6 o'clock's coming up. You can work out. 7:30 is coming up. You can eat, 11, 12, time for bed. It's like, yes. And I don't know what that's all about. So, yeah.
That is, yeah. See, your ideas lead to some other counterpoints for me. Like, is this where you and I inject? I have this thought a lot. Like, do you inject a whole new dimension into your life? Something that would be a little foreign to the way it is now. Like, for instance, like, I'll start working on muscle cars, or like a remote interest that you never pursued, or I'll start golfing for an outlet, or another part of me knows damn well that like going out in the skate park 3 times a week early in the morning before the high school kids get there and just rolling around. Literally, I can't do a lot right now. I'd have to get my sea legs back under me, and it would take a while anyway to even be remotely tricky on the skateboard. But I know things like that would help. So part of it is kind of rests on my shoulders. But then the thing is too that dawns on me as you speak is like our personalities. You and I, we're responsible, we're mindful, we have a guilty conscience, maybe. So if our laziness or whatever feelings of malaise that we're going through at the moment, right? If that manifested itself in us actually being lazy and just going and not doing the things that we needed to do, or not doing them well, or doing them half-assed or something, what we would end up doing is we would worry about the things not getting done or not getting done well. So that's not, in a way, I won't speak for you, but I think this is the same for you. That's not even an option.
No.
It's not
that's
even
exactly
an option.
right.
It's just going to make it worse. It's going to compound the situation.
That's exactly right. Very well said. It's not an option. There are certain things that are not options. In my life, like I know, it's like, I actually said this recently to Micah. We were just talking about things, whatever, and I was like, I wouldn't be able to have an affair because I think it's wrong. But I wouldn't be able to have an affair because I would never also be able to live with it. It's wrong. Yes. I wouldn't do it. But one of the major reasons why I think it's wrong is not only the morality or lack thereof of it and the lying, and this is the way I put it to her, is like my mind works where the second that that happened, every interaction we have changes from that point on. And I'm lying about the intent of every interaction after that. And I know myself well enough to know that I could never even get within a light year of that. Right. And so you have nothing to worry about. Seriously. Like, because it would have to break down so much that the relationship would barely not even exist anymore for me to
absolutely,
get to that point.
Dude.
And so I totally understand
the pleasure that brought, right? It would be outweighed by the guilt, the constant pressure, worrying.
You ever wonder about that? I mean, people.
Oh,
I've known people that have cheated on their significant others, and I'm not proud to know them. Oh, I'm proud. Right. I'm there for someone. Come on, we're my friends, and I've never really had the balls to ask. And you obviously hear in society, people are fucking cheating on everyone all the time. It's right? Like, how do you do that?
It's it's got to be the biggest juggling act to, like work of deception. I don't, you know what? Here's something I think about a lot. This is where my mind goes to. This is how crazy it gets. We know people in our lives right now, be it friends, neighbors, family members, remote family members, people we don't see a lot, whatever, that are cheating and we don't know it.
Get it. You got it. There you go.
That's such a weird thought, isn't it?
Definitely.
Such a
and I've been cheated on by a couple women. And at least in my case, you don't know. You really don't.
You don't.
But I'm also not very smart. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is what did I write down here? I don't. I guess I can't remember what I wanted to say otherwise. I guess that was it.
Well, I promise a more humorous and much more self-deprecating topic next time. This is just what I'm going through. I have to be honest with you guys. This is just, I'm going through this strange thing. Kyle apparently is too, and maybe it's the way of the world, man. Maybe it's not just us. Maybe this is the way people are being afflicted. I'm not just saying, what we've been going through the last couple of years with this virus and all this kind of thing, but just, I don't know, just the way of the world right now. Inflation.
I feel, well, yeah. Oh yeah, dude. I mean,
right.
It just makes me more of a populist. Like, we both do well for ourselves. Inflation doesn't, I mean, it sucks for us, but it doesn't hurt us. It hurts a lot of people out there. It destroys them, so stay steady out there, of course. But yeah, I think about You know what? I can read my notes now. What I wanted to say was I wonder what the tipping point would be for me. And one of the things that I think about, as dark as it is, and I don't want to tempt fate or whatever, is that I think that, and I've said this in the past, is that I just think I dodged death quite a bit. Not for me, but for people in my life. And I feel like that's the kind of stuff that can start delivering body blows to you. You know, where you start functioning in different realities or have to be compartmentalizing things and all of that. I think for as shitty as my life has been sometimes, like I kid around, although I do mean it, like my childhood was stolen from me at age 7, straight up. And I mean that. But for all of the things that have happened to me, could have been way worse and things turned out great. So I try not to like focus too much on the negative, but we'll continue to track carefully your midlife crisis.
Yeah. I think it's all about having things to look forward to, right? You got to kind of build everything on hope, a foundation of hope, and just having those little, could be a little thing. Like I love the idea that you guys are dabbling with the concept of doing a D&D game every week or every 2 weeks or every month. Like it could be something as simple as that, like something to look forward to, something with friends. You could unwind, have a drink, have a laugh, that type of thing. So it might just be, and I don't really get to see friends. That could be a whole dimension missing from my life.
Yeah, I have no friends. I mean, I really don't have any friends. I mean, that's the truth. Like I have a few people that I've been long time friends with, like Ramon and Mike.
Yeah.
And I have my siblings, and I have Micah, of course, but I don't really have any friends.
Those mainstays. I think that's men our ages. I think that's typical. I think we go through that as we go through life, you know, cultivate these adult responsibilities, and time goes quick and we're busy. So yeah, that might be something for me and you to be mindful of. Like, you know, just get that dimension of going out to the pub and having a drink every week with a friend and catching up, go see a movie, go do chip and putt. You don't have to do 18 holes of golf at the country club. You know what I mean? Go to
Chippendales.
Whatever. Go do Chippendales.
Yeah.
Look, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. Get out there. All right. The topic today, another fan voted topic, Uncharted 3. Drake's Deception, which came to PlayStation 3, the very famous date 11/1/11, so November 1st, 2011. Of course, we remember. Comes from Naughty Dog. And what's interesting about this game is that it's the final game that Amy Hennig was there for, and that had put out. So, like, she worked a little bit on Battlefield Hardline, I think, but so it's been a long time. And the game came to PlayStation 3. It was ported to PlayStation 4 by Blue Point in 2004, so you can play it there as well. I did what I did with the other 2 games, which is I just watched a playthrough. I've played Uncharted 3 a million times. I just have to have some economy with my time. I can't just be playing every game that I've already played 3 times. So
that's hard.
It was cool. It was cool to go into. It was cool to kind of watch it like a movie, which I did. I watched like a 6-hour full playthrough of it. And I'm very curious, Dave, to start off. We haven't played Uncharted 4 yet. I've often said that Uncharted 4 is a game that I rushed through and did not give a fair shake to. So I don't even want to judge. You can't judge it. I don't want to judge it because I don't feel like it's fair. And so we have the trilogy on PS3 established from Naughty Dog, Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 from 2007, 2009, 2011. I ask you, what do you think of Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception? And do you think it's the best one so far, or where would you slot it?
Yeah, you know, first of all, it feels great for this old school gamer being 3 games deep now into this classic franchise. I have to say, pat myself on the shoulders. It's a good feeling. And dude, I had such an awesome time with the game. I'm sure that's not a huge surprise to you guys. Frankly, I was sorry to see it come to an end. And, you know, I was thinking about this game in comparison to my first 2 experiences, and I loved them all. And if I had to go pound for pound and pick one, I would probably edge out 2 over my experience with 3 by just a slight margin. Just in terms of wows and smile and talk out loud to myself moments of just awe. But I have to say, and just thinking about my experience with Uncharted as a whole and how much I love it and how much I love the characters and everything so far, I'm not really necessarily looking for something different or better with each iteration, because I just fell in love with the franchise by the end of 2. I'm just looking for fun. And I'm looking for a return to these amazing characters that I've grown to love, especially Nate and Sully. And of course, they're going to have different adventures, different baddies to deal with in each thing, different treasures to go after, different scenarios. Maybe we learn more about the characters as we did in 3. But I'm not necessarily looking for improvements because I already love it so much. So in all fairness, I realized that by the time I was a quarter of the way through Uncharted 3, that I just really enjoy this franchise. And I think they do a great job with evolving it while still stitching through those consistencies that we're looking for. And I just had an awesome time, dude. I really, really had fun. To me, it seemed like a nice mashup of Indiana Jones and Guy Ritchie. I love British gangster films, especially Guy Ritchie, but British gangster films going all the way back to the 60s. Of course, it seemed like that a little more in the beginning, like it was going to be like that. And then it kind of goes off in a different direction. But I loved it. I loved it for everything it brought that I was expecting it to bring and that I was hoping it would bring. And I love it for the little differences and the little evolutions. I think, I have very little bad to say about it, but I'm going to go on for the next 2 hours gushing, if that's fair.
That's totally fair. I've long been a proponent of Uncharted 3 being the best Uncharted. And it's not a popular opinion. A lot of people think that I like to be contrarian, and I really don't. I just make the call that I feel like is the right one to be made. And people that have listened to me for a long time know that I've said this before, so I'm sorry for the redundancy, but it's important to place this here because it comes from the source that Naughty Dog, people at Naughty Dog, when I interviewed 20 something people there for the history of Naughty Dog at IGN, the common theme from Amy all the way down was, if we put Uncharted 3 out before Uncharted 2, everyone would love it more. In other words, what they're saying is that Uncharted 2 was such a revolution from Uncharted 1, because there's no doubt that the jump from 1 to 2 is much greater than the jump from 2 to 3, because they really unleashed the power of the PS3 with the second game. And this is much more refined. I mean, there's even different models in this game and stuff. So, and they made it in 2 years. It's almost impossible to imagine making games that quick. And so I think that there's some sort of relevance to that they think that Uncharted 2 is just so important to Uncharted, so important to PlayStation and the studio, that they could never possibly follow it up with anything anyone would give a fair shake to. And that they would have felt the same way about Uncharted 3 if it had come out second, and then they would have treated 2 the same way if it come out as 3. That's basically how they feel, and they were very open about that. I personally think that, yes, it's very attractive for multiple reasons to me. The British gangster angle, totally interesting. The connection to, and I think this is vital, the connection to childhood is... Oh, yes. Now, this was a huge secret. This was something that didn't leak. We didn't see it. I didn't even know about it. No one knew about it until they started playing that. In the second chapter, you see Nate as a child and play as him as a teenager. And we see how he meets Sully. This is an essential story. I mean, this is an essential part of the story. And not to spoil too much, but while I thought it was fine, what frustrated me about the Uncharted film was that they tried to redo that story. And I'm like, that's not, it's like, no. It's cool. I didn't mind the movie. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, but trying to show me how Nate and Sully meet, we already know how Nate and Sully meet. That's not, we already know. This is how they met. They met at a museum in Colombia.
Right.
And so that's really cool. The connection from Marlowe to Sully and then kind of coming back in the beginning, that's really relevant to me. And I think the lack of supernaturalism, I think, is really cool. And they also play around with a lot of things too. They play around with killing, you obviously in the beginning, something's up, but they kill around straight up with playing Sully. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you about. They played around with that in the first game too. But so there's a lot for me to like here. And I think that there's something to be said about, how do you follow Uncharted 2 up? How do you follow that train sequence up? How do you follow the huge statue that you're pushing in all sorts of different directions? And the answer is that they do it pretty ably. This game's directed by Justin Richmond. It's not directed by Amy Hennig, so it's got a little bit of a different feel, and I would argue a more cinematic feel because she's not involved in it. Mm-hmm. And can focus more on the creative aspects. And so there's a lot there that I think you're right on. Like, there are criticisms to be leveled against this game. I think there's some strangeness. I think there's a lot of convenient things that happen, and I think that there are at least 2 vignette style asides in the game that almost get you from point A to point B. You don't really understand how this happens. Specifically, the boat sequence with Ramses, and then when you meet the riders. Yes, this is weird. And I actually love the boat sequence. So, but I just wanted to lay all that out. That I think that Uncharted 3 is a masterpiece. I actually remember it in 2011. Greg Miller reviewed it, and when we would give games a 10, which I only gave one game a 10, so and never really had to deal with this too much, was that you had to kind of like, everyone had to kind of sign off on it, like the bosses, because it's like a pretty big thing to give a 10. Not so much anymore. They seem to give them away much more, but I think there was something like 13 10s when I left IGN.
Wow.
And he gave this game a 10, and I remember being in the meeting and kind of vouching for it. I'm like, this is a really special game. I don't know. I don't see what's wrong with it. Now, what was surprising to me going through everything that people wrote into us on Patreon, of course, you can write into us about the show and get read on the show, patreon.com/laststandmedia, early ad free access as well. A lot of people are kind of a little more critical.
Oh, that's good to go. All right.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
So we have that to work off of. So let me see here. You know what? I want to start let's start at the very beginning. What do you think of that awesome bar sequence? I just really dig it. Cool setup with the ring and the money and them getting shot in the back and Cutter being a turncoat. I don't know if you know this, but one of the reasons why this is this section of the game is actually notorious in games history is because hidden in this section is a Last of Us teaser that they forgot to take out of the game.
No.
There's a whole story. So the teaser, for people that want to go look, is that on the bar is a newspaper, and the newspaper says like Outbreak or something, and it has like a picture of like a clicker on it and like all sorts of things on it.
Oh shit.
The story behind that is someone put that in as like a joke, because as people know, Naughty Dog split into two teams at this point. One team was working on The Last of Us, one team was working on Uncharted 3. And there's some crossover, but that was like their attempt to kind of do two games at once. And they ended up collapsing that and not doing that anymore after that. But they kind of put it in there, I think one artist or one asset producer or whatever, as a joke. Like, here's a joke from our team to your team or whatever. And then it just stayed there. Build after build after build after build through alpha, through beta, to the final gold build of the game, and then a launch. And no one noticed it. And when they noticed it, apparently, this is a great story, because when they noticed it, they were so horrified, because at that point still, people have to remember, we're, I don't know, a year away from learning about The Last of Us at this point, I think. And so something like that, maybe not quite a year. I think we actually learned about it a little bit after that, but we don't really know much. But they were afraid of taking it out because they knew that like eagle-eyed people will be like, what did you take out? Why did you take out the newspaper? And then they'll go find the newspaper in the previous versions on the disc version and figure out that it's teasing something. So it was this thing in the open that no one knew about. And it never teased the game, and no one ever figured it out. Which I think is really funny. Yeah.
That's an awesome little insight. I love that. I love hearing the 2011 touch coming to this game 11 years later. So this is all awesome.
Yeah. So it's so that I love that story, but I love that sequence because it's a really clever tutorial for combat. It's funny. It reintroduces the characters. What's so great about being in the third game? I mean, think about Return of the Jedi or something. Being in the third game is you don't have to introduce anyone. You introduce the villains, Jabba the Hutt, right? Or Marlowe.
Right.
But otherwise, you're kind of familiar with everyone. You have this kind of guy, Cutter, you don't really know. Maybe he's more of a Lando type character. You're not really super familiar with him. But I like how they don't have to waste time with that. And you just kind of get into it. You know them. You know their relationship. You know they're up to something. So they can just roll right into it. It feels so good. And I do agree. The first 20 minutes before you go to Columbia is a total Guy Ritchie movie. I mean, it's awesome. So what did you think of that opening sequence, the brawl in the bar and meeting Marlowe and Talbot?
It's such a fun beginning, and it's a little unexpected if you played the first two Uncharteds, because you're not used to seeing these characters necessarily in a contemporary urban setting. So automatically it's cool. And of course, as soon as you find out it's London, you're automatically thinking gangster movie, Guy Ritchie, Long Good Friday, Get Carter, Sexy Beast, Gangster #1. Like all these things are channeling through, and I'm just getting so excited. And then you find out the fight is awesome. I mean, that is one awesome thing that Naughty Dog does with these games, is they build in these tutorials that just feel like fun. They just feel like a fluid part of the game. So you find out that continues, and you find out your melee combat, what you could do that's familiar, what you could do that's a little new evolution, the new stuff you could pull off. And it's very cinematic. You know, it feels like an Indiana Jones movie. You feel outnumbered. There's wisecracking, the acting and the motion capture is so good. The emoting, it feels very natural. It feels very funny, and it takes a very fun tone. You know, you think of things like the Lethal Weapon movies. You know, it just has that fun, engaging tone, maybe cross it with a little Quentin Tarantino. And you find out in the Charlie Cutter character that your duo is becoming a trio. And I love what you said about the Lando Calrissian comparison, Kyle, because you are kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop with this guy. Is this guy going to betray them? Is it going to be a triple cross? The whole thing. And the whole sort of exchange at the bar with the counterfeit money, the sale of the ring going awry, the brawl, and then that moment where the four of them, the three plus Chloe, are walking to the garage, and you got this real Reservoir Dogs moment of the four of them walking from the back, having the conversation just as things are getting started, and it really sets the tone of excitement, and while also carrying off that cinematic approach that feels like you're playing a movie, which is something. I guess I spent the better part of 14 hours on the game. The whole game feels like that. Feels like you're playing a movie, and it feels just interactive enough. And of course, I have some critiques of how they could have done it better, and they might have been a little hamstrung by the technology at the time too. But I just, pound for pound, right from the beginning moments of the game, it just feels like an amazing experience. And it's one of those things too, Kyle, where I just had the thought of, we're older, we're busy in life, we have 1,000 things to do. And you don't want to feel like you're wasting your time on a video game. And I don't think I've had that experience on KnockBack yet. So we've been very lucky with what we've chosen. But the Uncharted series so far for me just feels like a great use of time. Like, I'm so glad I spent those 5 nights with the game. You come away really feeling grateful for the experience. And, it's just so much fun, dude. And, I have to say, I'm really sad. Now, I haven't played 4 yet. We're going in order. We will play it eventually. I haven't played any of the satellite games, so the little in-between adventures. But I'm almost sort of, I don't know. I don't really know where it could even possibly go from here. It's been that good of a ride so far. And I don't think I've had that experience with any franchise yet, where I'm like, wow, where can they possibly go from here? That still feels like Uncharted, but feels like something new. So they got me. They got me hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, there is almost nothing like Uncharted still to this day that it's hard to replicate. I often say, obviously Uncharted inspired by Tomb Raider, then inspired by Uncharted. And so you have kind of that interplay. But Uncharted is one of those games that seems to have never really been replicated because it's so true to its origins as an Indiana Jones kind of thing and all this, and Tomb Raider, that it would be hard. It's kind of like Cuphead. We say about Cuphead, it would be hard to copy it because how could you without just copying it to the point where it's gratuitous and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think they play that very well. And there's just something about these very becoming characters that we can relate to and we like and we root for. I also think that Uncharted does a really nice job of letting good things happen to characters as well, especially in the ending, which we'll talk about. So it's like very satisfying. It's not trying to hurt you or fuck up your expectations. They give you something. They lean into the pulpiness. They lean into like you said, the Indiana Jonesness of it. And actually, since you brought it up, Jeremy Tan wrote in and said, "Greetings, brothers Moriarty. Hope you're both doing swell.
Yo.
After playing through the series and getting the Platinum Trophy a couple of years back, I came to prefer Uncharted 3 over 2 as my favorite game in the series. Uncharted 3 felt like a fitting, at the time, ending for Nathan Drake's adventures as he rides into the sunset with Sully and Elena. As a big indie fan, I couldn't help but notice the inspirations drawn from The Last Crusade throughout this adventure. In particular, the focus on the father-son-like relationship between Nate and Sully. The game intentionally draws a lot of parallels with The Last Crusade, from the flashback sequence involving young Nate at the beginning, stowing away on a jet instead of a Zeppelin, to an epic late-story horseback riding sequence in a canyon to rescue their respective father figure from a vehicle convoy. My question is, were these inspirations apparent to you on your initial playthroughs? If so, how did noticing these pretty direct nods to The Last Crusade affect your experiences with this masterpiece of a game? I must admit, I'm usually not very tuned into shit like this, but I did notice that. And not all of what you said, but I noticed a lot of it. Especially, it really came to The Last Crusade stuff really came to fruition with me with the horses and the convoy. I was like, this is just the end of The Last Crusade. I mean, and you can see that, and that's cool because they're open about Indiana Jones being a major, it's obvious, a major inspiration for it. But if Indy, they add a dynamic to it though, because it's Indy by himself. He has like what's that guy, Belloc or whatever.
Yeah.
But otherwise, he is with the different girl in each film. But in this, they give him a father figure that's there in the third indie film, and a consistent girl figure that is only briefly challenged in the second one. So I'm curious, did you notice these Indiana Jones odes as well? And how do you feel about all the different inspirations coming to bear? Because I must admit that there's way more than just Uncharted, I think, in these films. And I've given Amy Hennig a lot of credit before as being a deep study. So who even knows where a lot of the shit actually comes from? But it all comes from somewhere. So did you notice those specific angles?
Absolutely. And I also, before I forget to say, I love the tie-ins with T. Lawrence and Lawrence of Arabia as well. I mean, that was huge. And it seems like a logical progression for them to bring the adventure there and use that as a big part of the inspiration. But I love that too. I mean, you definitely see the Indy and the Dr. Jones Sr. comparison here. What I loved about it is that I fell in love with Nathan Drake and Sully, especially these two characters. Not only them as individuals, but them as a tandem, them as a team, as a protege and a mentor. So I love that they played it up, gave us a little more of that love and affection, and sort of that how they kind of drive each other and how they kind of build each other as characters and as people. But also to see like the fact of like them really going to bat for each other. Like there's a moment in this where Charlie betrays them and Sully's ready to blow his head off because he could possibly hurt Nathan, who is his son, his surrogate son. And to see that actually what we thought their relationship was probably like, to actually see that play out was so cool. I love those moments. And so it's not just about the gameplay. It's about that you're really seriously invested in these characters, but also to see the origins. By the way, I'm wearing the young Nathan Drake shirt. I don't know if you guys noticed.
Very nice.
And to see how that relationship started, where it sort of kicked off from, how it kicked off, and to know a little bit outside of that, even hearing about, even though it's a little bit, we could have probably got a little more. Maybe we do later. I don't know. To hear about young Nate in the orphanage and adopting the name from Francis Drake, and we find out a little more. So it was really kind of special to see that. My biggest call out, oddly, to Indiana Jones as a franchise in general, I always think this, but especially in this game, Colin, number 3, every time you go toe to toe melee combat with like a big bad, I always think of Indy's battle with the giant German dude on the tarmac.
Yeah.
Right? The guy that ends up in the getting grinded up by the propeller. Getting minced up. Flambe. What do you call it? When you do the blender operation. What is that one?
I don't know.
Whatever that one is. But I always think of that moment. And every time, because you come face to face with a couple of heavies in this one. And I always go back to that moment. And I'm sure that's what they're thinking of, even if it's like, in the back of their minds. But I love it. I love all the ties to Indy. And I just love that they carried out that relationship between Sully and Nate and really kind of built on that, because I love these two characters. I'm ride or die for these games just for these two, if nothing else. So seriously, it's probably two of my favorite video game characters ever. Like I find them really lovable and their relationship is so appealing to me.
Well, I think that what's impressive about games like this, and what I think these games do better than almost any other, and are certainly replicated for it, is just the characterization and interchange between characters and all of the rest happening during quiet moments. They don't waste any time doing something. They're always talking back and forth to each other. You learn. It's like, it's just like stupid things that you would never, like, what are they even talking about? When he's like, remember Peru? Oh, you're going to bring up Peru and all this. I just like how they're always filling the time and giving it this feeling that they really do know each other, that they really do love each other, that there's all of this stuff that we don't know about. Now, Golden Abyss, the Vita game, is a prequel to these games, but a sequel to the first one, I want to say. Okay. And then the fourth one takes place after everything. So that's all you're missing at this point.
Okay.
And I would say some people, Golden Abyss is a Sony Bend game. It counts, but I don't think that you're missing too much.
Oh, it's not Naughty Dog.
No. It was made by Bend and for the Vita. So with their great, blessings or whatever.
Sure.
Who knows if they even had a choice. But I think I just think that father-son relationship is at the center of what makes this so charming, that they do so much to develop the characters, that there's just so much direction and effort that goes into a game like this, that it's impressive that the game is built from stem to stern so you can go through it and do everything. Just that alone in 2 years is insane, but filling it all with
that's insane.
Life is even insaner. And yeah, I don't know how they did it. I really don't.
That's insane.
2 years for 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 got stuck in development hell a little bit just because Amy Hennig left and they had to kind of restart. But
yeah, I didn't even know she didn't have anything to do with that one. Wow.
Well, she did. On 4 she announced 4 herself.
Okay,
at like some event.
Okay.
And but when she was dismissed or whatever, or left, when no one really knows the nature of it still, they took everything she did and kind of reworked it. Like all of the parts of the game were in her game. They're just kind of remixed, and they wrote the story around it and all that because they had already built everything, the gray boxes and all that. So it's interesting to think about Uncharted 3, 2011, the moment, November 2011, playing it through and being like, yeah, this does feel like there's not much left to say, but they do have more to say. But since it's something I wanted to talk about later, but since we're talking about them now, I think we should just bring it up now. I am curious about what you thought of the inclination of Sully being killed at the end. Tom Brown wrote in and said, hey guys, I really enjoyed Uncharted 3 when it came out. Thought the story was amazing, albeit one section, the Sully death section. I didn't think it was well placed or executed, and as we know, was a fake out. As deaths usually this far into a trilogy shock the audience, who would the Moriarty brothers have up on the chopping block in an Uncharted series? Personally, I always thought it could have been done with a bit more stakes and consequences. Sully's the only one that really, I think, could die amongst the main characters, with it being kind of within the vein of its action origins and its pulpy origins, preferably maybe no one dying even. But I remember seeing that and being like, holy shit, they actually killed him. And playing it when right before it came out. And I wasn't happy about it. And then when he comes back, it's like, oh, thank God. But then I remember talking to Amy and others, and they deny this, and I believe them. But I was like, did you guys bring him back because you had complaints or something? Or it felt very much like Duke is in a coma from G.I. Joe,
Yes,
instead of Duke is
very
dead.
much so.
And they say no. And in watching it and kind of knowing more about games now and stuff, the ending is structured around Sully and all that. I believe them. But did you believe it when it happened? I mean, because they've pulled this move in the past, but it looked pretty convincing this time.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I was dubious because you don't really know. I mean, first you think, like, you already, at this point in the story, you already are very familiar with the fact that you're dealing with this hallucinogenic agent and that things aren't always what they seem. Drake already had his first hallucination adventure. This is a big part of the plot later on. So, but you're also thinking, all right, it's Uncharted. It's a famous franchise. It's critically acclaimed. Maybe it's a baller move, and I have to say, I would be heartbroken. I would be wrecked. And I tie this to my current time in my life because I just finished Stranger Things, and no spoilers, but you get gutted at the end of the latest Stranger Things. They're not, and it reminds me of going back to Harry Potter, where they're not afraid to kill characters, and that was kind of my first modern tie to something like that, where a writer will go in and kill like a Cedric Diggory. It's like, and that dude did not deserve to die. So that I'm always calling up pop culture touchstones like that to be like, all right, is this really happening? But I love playing through that moment with Nate's rage, also vis-a-vis his hallucinations, like fighting the Ghost Rider flaming head soldiers, knowing that's part of his trip. That's part of this trip that he's going on, this hallucination, these mind games. I was very relieved to find out that it wasn't the case that Sully was dead. It also happens very quick. So it does seem like a little shoehorned into the last quarter of the game, because remember, prior to that, around the middle point of the game, Sully's missing for a large chunk. I mean, you go on this wild goose chase to rescue him from Ramses in that first in the ship / wharf into Ramses' boat, his yacht, with his ship, whatever it is. And it turns out that he never even had him in the first place. And then, so Sully's missing for a while. So then for him to turn up and then go miss and then get killed, it seemed off. It didn't seem believable. It seems like they could have pulled a better rabbit out of their hat for that moment. But I guess they wanted to do something that elicited Nate's pain and his rage and, him flying off the deep end, which, I think that could have went really badly if that really did happen. And then also again with Talbot sort of seemingly kicking Sully to the curb again, right in that last encounter where he kind of knocks Sully out and then kicks him into the drink, So it was interesting the way it played out. Again, I think, for instance, Kyle, I wouldn't have minded this game ping-ponging back from contemporary modern times to playing more as young 15-year-old Nate. I think that would have been really, really fun. I don't know if you do a thing where it would have felt really dynamic with modern Nate and the weaponry, and then going to Kid Nate, maybe has a slingshot, he throws rocks, whatever it is. Something that I feel like they could have capitalized on more. But for what they decided to go with, I think they did a good job.
Yeah, what did you think about, what are your grander thoughts about Nate's origins and him meeting Sully and all of that? Did it feel organic and natural to you? See, I really like the idea of them kind of going after a similar treasure and them kind of just encountering each other at the museum, and he lifts his wallet and pickpockets him and kind of gets, brings him to the bar and gets him food and tries to introduce himself. And I like it. I think it's a little weird, but when you really think about it, but I like, cause it's very fast where it's like, yeah, kid, like I want to show you a thing or two or whatever. And it's like, okay, cool. But you had to meet somehow, and there's way more texture to it 20 years hence. There's so much time that had passed since then. But what did you think overall? I know you said you wanted to go back, but were you satisfied with that whole sequence? What did you think of seeing young Nate? Was that a surprise to you?
It definitely was. Yeah, I had no idea they were going to do that. I think it was super fun. I love when we meet him, he's already kind of a young thief in training, or, he's got that whole historical bent. He's already kind of like got an obsession. So that's something compounded by meeting a kindred spirit that's 25 years older. And I just love their relationship from the beginning. You could see that this is a young orphan. He's kind of a hard case. He's kind of a hard ass. At first, he really wants nothing to do with Sully, despite Sully's prodding. And I love, I don't want to get Victor Sullivan's personality washed out in this either. Like his personality as somebody who is, somebody who's made mistakes. He's obviously a scoundrel, but he's still kind of a caring, nurturing individual underneath all that. And of course, very charismatic. And you could see how in Sully's personality, those traits are handed down to adult Nate. Like you could see like he's a proper protege to Sully. And I think it's really fun way to introduce the villain too. I think Marlowe is ultimately a little bit of a diluted villain, but I like the way she's tied into the origins, that she's an employer or a benefactor or a client of Sully's at that time. Maybe or maybe not. There's some kind of romantic entanglement. I'm not really sure about that. But the fact that I don't think they really capitalized on the opportunity of having a fleshed out villain with her, but at least she's tied into the origins and she's there. What's cool is she's there from when Sully and Nate meet. So she's an important part of this story too, because she goes back just as deep as they're becoming a duo. So that was kind of a neat thing, if for nothing else. And again, just kind of the way she's kind of part of this shadowy British organization that's somehow tied into Sir Francis Drake. And it seems a little Masonic. Maybe there's some kind of occult supernatural stuff tied in with it, which is interesting. Again, they didn't really explore that too deeply. They could have got a little scarier with that, but I like the way they kind of brought it all together. It's a lot of fun. And I love playing as young Nate, where you have to run from Marlowe's agents on the rooftops. I could have definitely gone for more of that, where it could have been a little bit more of a dynamic, maybe even in terms of gameplay, the jumping, the running, the agility could have been a little different. It could have felt a little different. So it could have been kind of two games in one. And to have that ping pong back and forth could have been great. Now, maybe we get to see young Drake again. I'm not sure. But I would have loved to have more of that as well. I think that would have been fun.
Totally. I can see that. Yeah, this bounce back and forth thing. But I dig that they did it. They did it early. They got it out of the way. And they kept it. I'm sure they're so thrilled they kept it secret. That didn't
Oh,
leak.
they did?
Yeah, that didn't leak, which is cool for
That's
them,
really
I'm
cool.
sure, that you get to play as him. I want to talk to you. We were talking about Marl a little bit. One of the things that I like about Uncharted, specifically 2 and 3, is how feminine they are. There are a lot of cool female characters in these games. It starts in 2 with the dynamic between Elena and Chloe, but then it continues in 3 with Chloe and Elena both coming back in their own way, plus Marlo being the big baddie. No, I dig that. I don't think it's relevant one way or the other, but I happen to think that the 2 female characters in these games, the 2 female protagonist type characters in Elena and Chloe, are both very endearing. And I was curious if you expected to see them both back in or not, because Cutter is a new introduction to us, and you almost expect that that's kind of like our guy. This, which I wouldn't have really minded, because our companion is often a woman or Sully, so it would have been like, okay, there's some dude with us now. We've had other guys with us in the past here and there, but like Flynn. But I'm wondering what you think of Chloe and Elena, and did you expect to see them pop up? Were you pleased? I think the game's well more than halfway through the game before we see Elena at all. So you can imagine a situation where they're not together, and then there's a whole thing with their marriage and all of this. So what do you think of all that?
It was cool to see them both back. I was waiting for Elena to show up, and I thought it got, like you said, it got pretty far into the game. So I thought there was a chance that we weren't even going to see her in this adventure, which I thought was interesting, especially when you consider the fact that Chloe is in it from almost the beginning. They bring her back. So I thought that was an interesting choice. I was waiting. I found myself waiting chapter after chapter for Elena to show up. And of course, she does show up in Yemen. And I was happy to see her show up. And you always think how that's going to, how is this going to pivot the story now? How is this going to play out now that she's involved again? The Chloe character, I feel like she's underused a little bit. I like when you sort of put it together that you have 4 adventurers, our 2 heroes, and then this new guy in Charlie, and then Chloe, to have this foursome on the first half of the adventure so they could pair off, 2 go to France, 2 go to Syria. I understand why they did it this way, but I think Chloe gets a little underused. And then she and Charlie, I mean, Charlie gets a broken leg. She's nurturing him. They're out of the equation because of his injury. And I thought Charlie was going to die. So I was really relieved that they let Cutter live. But they kind of just dropped them from the entire thing, whatever it is, 50% into the game, which I thought was an interesting choice. And I think Chloe is ultimately underused. I think I kind of felt that way about her in 2 as well. But again, you kind of got to let the cream rise to the top. So if this story is going to be about Nate and Sully, and then the estranged marriage with Nate and Elena and all that kind of stuff, I guess you got to you can't clutter it, the workings too much. But I was pleased. I mean, I was really pleased to see that it feels like a proper full adventure to have that many characters. That it's not just Nate and Sully. You have Chloe and Charlie doing their thing as well. They're all together. All 4 of them are together for a little while. So it feels like it's the adventure is populated with enough players to keep it interesting, which I think they do like a good movie. It just plays out the same way in this game form.
Yeah, the only post Uncharted 4 content that there is The Lost Legacy, which is a kind of a standalone spinoff of Uncharted 4 that I think stars Chloe and Nadine, and I don't think you even know Nadine yet. So
okay,
so we see a little bit more of her.
Oh,
later.
That's good to know. That's good to know.
Which is good. All right, so I want to ask you a little bit about the history of the game. We had brought it up a little bit earlier, but I think it's relevant to dive deeper into it. One of the coolest things about this to me as a lover of history, and certainly Indiana Jones and the things that inspired it, is just this kind of it's fun, right? Like you can go back and say whatever the fuck you want. That's what's so cool about this stuff. It takes a lot of cleverness to be able to tie Walter Raleigh and Nathan Drake into this thing in Indonesia and Borneo and all, and you have to kind of line up the maps and the numbers, make sure it all makes sense in a very basic way. But it is true that Drake was just out in the water for years at a time. Like, who the fuck knows what he was really doing, in quotes. And it's fun to go back and think about that stuff. Do you like mining history for stories like this? Of course, it became famous. I think Indiana Jones made it famous, but I think the Da Vinci Code really brought it to a head with this idea of going back and having this very deep linear history of all these things that happen for reasons and are tied together. The Assassin's Creed games do that too. So what do you think of the depths of history here? The idea of Drake kind of it's cool. Drake finding this thing. To frame it, they're pursuing this obsessively. They find what one of the things they're looking for, and they find evidence that Drake himself, Francis Drake, was like, I don't want anything more to do with this, and hides it from everybody. So it's like this catastrophic secret that he didn't want to get out. I think it's pretty neat. What do you think about cool. their mining of history?
I think it's so fun. I think it's a really fun formula to sort of hang your story loosely on famous historical figures, places, objects, and treasures. And then you could kind of play fast and loose with what you want to incorporate that's actually from supposed real history and your story and fiction, and making it fun, but making it feel grounded. I think that's what it does so well. And me not being a student of history like you are, I don't know what's real and what's not. So it gets really interesting when you hear about these historical shadowy organizations and cover-ups and lying to the queen and famous explorers that run afoul of whatever, ancient spirits and all this kind of thing. It's really cool. And I think this story in particular, you think of Uncharted already and Nate and Sully, and you think of treasure hunting, but really this whole thing starts as a quest for a lost city, right? It actually starts really strange because Nate's selling his ring. So you're already like, alarms are already going off. Like what's happening here? Then the quest for the lost city just basically leads to the discovery of, an ancient kingdom doomed by a poisoned water supply that's supposedly beholden to some god punishing people and a genie, basically a genie, and this ancient sinister organization that's basically intending to use this water towards its own evil ends. So this thing that starts out to be a treasure hunt and maybe a quest for knowledge and a quest for history turns into trying to stop this evil organization from obtaining this thing that they shouldn't have, that they want to use to control people and sort of rule by fear by using this hallucinogenic water. So it's a really interesting story and kind of unique. I've never really heard of anything quite like that. And I like the way, again, it plays up the character of Nate and Sully, not just these greedy treasure hunters that are sort of out to line their pockets. They're turned into proper heroes because of what they realize they have to do. And that's just very clever storytelling to make these guys feel like proper heroes.
Yeah, it's it all works. It's all quite symphonic, And I think what's fun about the old history is you were saying like, well, I don't know the history. And I'm like, well, the reality is no one does.
Yeah.
Because you have this idea of Drake being out and he's writing his letters and he's writing in his notebook. Excuse me. But he just can't let them know these things, and how it brings in John D and the secret society. This is what I'm saying. Like all you have to do is line up the dates if you want it to make sense. Right. And make sure they're all kind of around each other and they're all doing these things. And then you could say whatever you want, because we really do not know what these guys were doing. They were tracking themselves. They were writing notes. They had their logs and all of this, but it's entirely possible that they were off doing things. I mean, isn't Blackbeard's treasure like one of the greatest, legends from that era?
Sure.
That even pirates were doing, and people encountering those things and all that. So it's good stuff.
It's so
one other thing I wanted to ask you, getting away from the history, is the more supernatural stuff. Or maybe we'll say lack thereof. Michael Amaro wrote in and said, "Hi, Colin and Dagan.
Yo.
I have to say this game is incredibly paced. After recently playing 2 and 3 back-to-back, 3 is the better game to me personally. What were your thoughts on Drake's hallucinations and the gameplay being modified to support this in the final sections? I thought it was a brilliant way to spice up gameplay in a way that was much more effective than the weird Guardian enemies in the final chapters of Uncharted 2. Thanks, boys." So I want to talk about the hallucinations, and I want to talk about the lack of supernaturalism, although there is this intended supernaturalism that isn't really explained. I remember this created a lot of different theories. I remember when we wrote it, I didn't write it, someone else did on IGN, that like, is Marlo actually like 400 years old or something like that? And like,
shit.
Because she seems to be connected to this secret society and all of that, but that's not, none of that's true. And it's funny because as Uncharted fans, we're trained to kind of go in and be like, okay, let's look around and where are the supernatural elements? We got the historical elements. But when you look around here, there are some supernatural elements. Like, where does Talbot go? He leaves behind the tarot card. He gets shot. There's all this weird stuff that doesn't really make sense. And maybe people have explained it, but I've not really seen it. But
yeah, there
is no overriding supernatural element to the game, which is different than the first two. And I dig that. I like that the treasure is this water. And it's crazy. I mean, Drake did everything he could to make sure no one ever found out about it. So I think that that's cool. Some people look at it, I think, as an overreaction to the consternation some people felt about being bludgeoned with just weird supernatural shit, especially the end with Lazarevich and Uncharted 2. I think that was, I thought that was kind of weak. I think it's, the blue sap and all of that. So what do you think of this? The idea that they're hallucinating then, and they show it, and they do a really nice job with it. But I'm wondering, did you like it or not?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, first of all, the first hallucination scene where you play as Drake going through the bazaar, going through that marketplace, and he's tripping. First of all, just as a concept, what a great idea. I thought, it's one of that when I play Uncharted games, and this was no different in Uncharted 3. I know I've said this in past episodes, but I'm talking to myself. I'm like out loud. What? Oh my God. Sometimes laughing out loud, just out of joy, out of encountering these experiences and coming across these ideas. It just as a creative, I think too, just kind of tipping my cap to the people who created this game and just thinking of these things, this inventive gameplay and these inventive sort of set piece moments that the game is built upon. It's built upon all these moments that are like jaw dropping, awe-inspiring ideas. And I love playing as that. Now, I would have loved to have seen more melty, distorted visuals, really elongating the limbs and really making it like a funhouse mirror. But again, I said it earlier, they might have been beholden to the technology at that point, not only in the visuals, but making those visuals a playable piece of the game. That may have been a bridge too far for that time, developing this in 2010. 2011. So, but I loved the idea of it. As a creative, I'm always thinking, how can we take that further? And now if you did a game like that, maybe everything would be melting and distorting, and you would see people morphing into animals and the limbs really stretching 20 feet and things like that. But I love the idea of it. And I have to say, Kyle, in the beginning of the game too, with the character of John D and investigating into that, and the fact that this was a warlock and he had spells, and there were these mutant undead spiders that they leave kind of relatively unexplained, that they kind of just drop after a while. It seemed like they were going to do more with the supernatural, maybe occult stuff. But again, maybe it's kind of refreshing that they kind of drop it, because you and I had talked about things like the Nazi characters in earlier iterations being a tip of the cap and a nod to like things like Indiana Jones. But again, like not saying, okay, the Germans are just looking for sources of power and dabbling into this supernatural, maybe things that they could harness and leverage in order to dominate the world or whatever. So just kind of putting that aside and making it a story about this organization that is not related to Nazi Germany. They're actually English. So they're actually allied powers, right? If you really think about it. And they're going after this thing that they could use to further their own ends, that they could use to instill fear and dominate. And I think that was interesting. It's interesting that they dropped the supernatural stuff, but, it seems like such a complex tapestry to weave a game like this. I love the way Uncharted 3 specifically feels like a fun story that you get invested in, but it's not too complicated. It's not too heady. But there are things in the game that, and I've seen criticisms and I understand them, that it seems like things were dropped, things were left untied and unresolved. And I guess that feels just a little bit sloppy. And I guess that's the chink in the armor maybe of this game, that maybe you can't introduce things like that if you're not going to run them through to the end and really be consistent. But I gotta think that's really hard to tie up all those loose ends and make sure everything is resolved when you get into this. I don't know. You got characters, you got bad guys, you got ancient historical things that you're trying to resolve. You got different places in the world, and you're trying to kind of bring it into like a tidy package, and that's got to be tough to do.
Yeah. When I see something like the bugs in Uncharted 3, just as a game person, just been in the world a long time and making our games now, that's a thing where it's like, oh, we have to use that again. We got that tech working. It's got to be used at least a couple more times. It reminds me a lot. You'll see on Uncharted 4, there's a specific mechanic, a sliding and like a hook shot kind of mechanic, which is cool, but they use it constantly. And you could tell it's because, which I thought was so corny, because I'm like, why do you keep encountering things like this over and over again? But it's because they got it to work. And they're like, all right, we need to use this now. You spent 2 months kind of tweaking this, and we got to get this tech up. We can get it running at 30 frames and all that. So that's the way I see things like that. It's kind of, I'm not that I'm forgiving them. In fact, it could be the exact opposite, because you could look at it as quote unquote lazy developing. I hate that term. But remember, they made this game in 2 years. It's incredible. It's insanity. Plus, it has a multiplayer mode. Incredible. So the whole multiplayer suite is a whole nother thing. I don't understand how they did it. It's just Naughty Dog's output during the PlayStation 3 era is insane, because of course they follow this 2 years after this with The Last of Us. So it's and then 3 years after that is Uncharted 4. And then they have the Lost Legacy after that. And then 3 years after that is Last of Us Part 2. I mean, it's a pretty nice run of games.
What a resume. Now, do you have any idea, Kyle, about what the size of the team that was creating Uncharted 3? How many people were involved in making the game on the ground level?
I would say it's probably, Naughty Dog was probably 250 at that point, and I would say it's probably 100 of them were working on Uncharted, 100 working on The Last of Us. Some people going in between.
Impressive.
Yeah, it is. And that was like one of the things I wanted to bring up, actually. Paul Andrew wrote in and said, hey, brother and other brother, one feature of Uncharted 3 that I enjoyed and hasn't quite caught on in other third-person games is context-sensitive melee animations. For example, grabbing the fish and hitting enemies with it in the market, or pushing an enemy against a wall and punching them. Did you guys notice these? Was there an animation that stuck out to you? Other than expense, do you think there's a reason this hasn't caught on in a broader market? This is the shit that makes Naughty Dog games, is because they find these. It's amazing, actually, when Drake's going through bodies in the market in Yemen, pushing through them, arms moving, everyone's moving naturally. It's a really incredible work of technological art to make something like that happen on the PlayStation 3. And then to give contextual clues, which The Last of Us, of course, was like the king of this shit. And you can tell it started in Uncharted, where, oh, you're near this corner and there's a thing here. This guy's head's getting bashed against that corner. That's the animation that's happening. That's very Last of Us. And you could see the makings of that here, because there is a lot of stuff like that. And you see that in the barroom brawl. You see that in various melees later on in the game too. It's the little things that make this game so grand. And so I noticed the melee animations, of course, but I noticed all of the random shit in this game. There's just so much going on. I thought even during the hallucination sections in the desert, or the desert village and all of that, it would be where you can't interact with everything. It would be fun to see how they framed everything and look for the seams in the game and how it all works, how the AI works and all that, because it's very complex. And this is the kind of stuff, Dave, that I just don't think a lot of people think about, but you notice it when it's, like you said, why isn't it in other games? Because it's hard and it's expensive. And this is the kind of thing a first party gets away with doing, not a third party that has much stricter deadlines and monetary goals and all of that. But this is the kind of stuff that I think game developers realize differentiates their games from other games. It's anyone can make a game like The Last of Us from stem to stern as a playable experience, but it's the interim, all the interim stuff, the writing, it's all of the little things that make it tick. The Last of Us isn't a masterpiece because it's this post-apocalyptic third-person shooter. It's a masterpiece because Ellie can sneak up behind a guy if the code tells her to do it just right and bash a brick over his head at just this right section, and it'll only happen there, and you'll probably not see it. And if you want to see a game that does that, has that shit all over it, The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, it's so insane how that game is almost like a ballet of combat and all the different ways it can go. And you can see they framed it all out, every possibility.
That's so cool.
And so you see that here. Do you like the little things? I mean, you must, having played 3 of these games now, notice that this stuff is not in other games.
Absolutely. And they're building and they're improving as they go. I noticed so many of the little nuanced things. Now, I didn't know about grabbing the fish and hitting an enemy with fish. I didn't even realize that. I got to go back and investigate into that. But just in general, how nuanced things were is very apparent from the beginning. I noticed one thing where both adult and Kid Drake, when they're walking around and they're kind of exploring Kid Drake in the museum in Colombia, and then later on just Nate in the tombs and the crypts and the chateau, when they're walking around, they're just looking around, like they'll do a thing that's a very naturalistic movement where they'll just touch the wall, not even like kind of half thinking, raise the arm and touch the wall as they're looking somewhere else. It was all very naturalistic, and you have to credit the mocap, which means, of course, you have to credit the performances by Nolan North and Richard McGonigal and Emily Rose and just the brilliant acting and the brilliant writing. But there is something really special in this game where the emoting and the interaction and just the naturalism in the acting in the cutscenes and in the playable moments is just next level for me. And you're talking about a game that's 11 years old, dude, which is pretty crazy to think about. And you know what I mean? Not only to have that in a film and how impressive it is visually, but to incorporate all of that into something playable is just a remarkable achievement. And I really recognized it from early on that you get so invested because it really does feel like a movie because of the animation, because of the mocap, because of the quality of the acting, the thoughtfulness of the writing, the dialogue, all of that stuff. I really found it to be some of the best I've encountered in games so far. And when you think of course, I played the remastered version on PS5 on the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection. I have the PS3 version right here, and I love playing. I could have just popped it on the PS3 in my studio, and I kind of love going back and exploring the origins and the originals like we did with Metal Gear Solid so far. But I was happy to play the remastered version because it really brings all of that stuff to the forefront and how great this game is. And I was just really taken aback. And for the melee combat, I thought it was cool for it to feel familiar coming off the first 2 games recently, but also to evolve it, to have the thing where you could drop down, hang from a ledge, sneak behind an enemy and pull him down so he plummets to his death. Or come from the stealth is a little... I think stealth could have been a little better in this game. The enemy AI is pretty tough on normal, even on normal. But to come behind and choke a dude out so you don't have to actually go toe to toe. And the melee combat being a few steps, punch, headbutt, and then dodge with the triangle button. And then, of course, you could undo, if you're being grappled or you're being held, you could break out with the circle button. But so I thought it was enough. But those little nuanced animations and the visuals and the acting, even the facial acting and the emoting, which you're not really expecting in a PlayStation 3 game, was just top notch.
Yeah, totally. And I dare I say, it's going to remain, no matter how many games you play, it's going to still remain up there. The only games that are really going to beat it in this regard are their own games.
Yeah.
And so I'll be interested to see what you think about those things when they happen. We were talking a little bit about combat. I was curious what you thought about the gunplay and the combat. I remember Uncharted 3's combat was a little controversial, I remember, because the aiming was off, but I think they patched it. And so if you played the Blue Point PS4 port, which you did, then I think everything should be well there. Did you enjoy the combat, the shooting? I
love it. I mean, it really just makes me, I've said this before, third-person shooters, I gotta dig deeper. I gotta delve in because that's really what I'm playing in this game.
Gears
of
War,
honest.
Dude. You should play Gears of War. That's like the third-person shooter.
I gotta jump into Gears of War, and you've recommended that to me before. So that's what I find myself looking forward to. Besides the story and just learning about the characters and the character building, which I love. The puzzle moments, we'll talk about that. But the combat, I found it to be really fun. My only criticism, and I'm surprised that they didn't improve it. And maybe there's a way to change it that I don't know about, but the aiming reticle being white, especially when you're playing in so many desert environments, is really that's an egregious error. It's amazing to me. Like when you're ambushing the convoy with Salim and his tribe on horseback, again, nod to Indy 3, super fun moment. So hard to see the aiming reticle because you're on a desert sky, which is practically white, so light blue, and sand. So you can't see it. But pound for pound, the combat I thought was, for me, super satisfying. Simplifying the cover system was great. Popping out of cover and firing. The assortment of weaponry I thought was awesome and satisfying. And there was one thing that I'm a little bit naive about, Kyle, and ignorant of, and I don't know if this is a thing or not, but one thing with the combat in this game, they definitely evolved it in terms of difficulty, for me at least, from the first two versions, where the enemy AI ramps up and gets more difficult as you get deeper into the game. Early on, you could melee with a guy and the other surrounding enemies will leave you alone. But later on, if you go toe-to-toe with a dude, some other enemy is going to shoot you while you're trying to do that. I appreciated that ramping level of difficulty because it forces you to form strategies. You can't just be wild and jump into the fray. You have to kind of really build out how you're going to tackle certain moments with the desert colony or the assault on the airport later on, or, the later levels where the enemy AI is a little more daunting. You got armored guys, one-shot kills with their shotguns. So you got to really kind of build out your tactics. And I appreciated that. But one thing I didn't know about was it seemed like whatever loadout I chose was the loadout that the enemies were dropping. So I could easily restore the ammo of my desired weapons rather than switching to something that
the game seems to know. Yeah,
it seems to know. Yeah. Now that's built. So that's not just me. That was actually kind of built into, I want this, I want the AK-47 or I want the Heckler and Koch. And this enemy is going to drop it, so I could reload that weapon rather than switching to something. It seems I'm not as good
I
at
get
using.
that vibe from a lot of games, and I think that this is not to say that it's hard coded in, but there might be some sort of tendency system or something in it, where it's like we're realizing you like this weapon and we want to make this fun for you. So wouldn't be surprised at all.
And maybe that's a normal thing too, where on difficult levels, maybe it's not so much. Maybe they don't placate as much. I don't know.
Yeah, we have to get to Gears, but we'll do it on the show. A little known thing about me is that I really like Gears of War. A lot of people don't know that about me. I wasn't a Halo guy, but I like Gears of War. And 1, 2, and 3 were the ones I played. I played 4 too, but I don't think I got all the way through it. I actually played it on a stream back at Kind of Funny, but we'll get to Gears of War because if you like third-person cover-based shooters, which is that's the king of them.
So fun.
There are a couple of games you should look into though, like on PS2, Black and
writing them down.
Kill Switch. Kill Switch is widely seen as kind of the progenitor of Gears of War in some ways.
Okay. Yeah, you recommended that.
And then there are wonderful, we'll play it on the show for sure. Spec Ops: The Line is probably my favorite third-person shooter, and Vanquish. Oh, yeah.
Oh. What's Vanquish for? What system?
Vanquish was PS3, but they ported it to PS4. That's a platinum game. So,
shit.
Yeah, so you check that. But Vanquish is fucking awesome. And when you play Vanquish, if you do, keep in mind what someone said to me once, which is so true. It's like, doesn't this look like a G.I. Joe game? So just keep that in mind as you play.
All right. I'm writing that here in my notes.
But back here in Uncharted 3 world, I want to talk about a few moments, and I'm curious about what you think of them. My favorite moment in all of Uncharted is the cruise ship. And Stephen King wrote into us, but not that Stephen King, and says, "Hello, Super Mario Bros. What was your favorite set piece in the game? And why was it the sinking cruise ship? From the moment Drake blows a hole into the hull of the boat, leading to the sink shipping before tipping onto its side, then Ramsey shooting out the wall, which is the ceiling at that point of glass, causing the mass water to rush into the ship as Drake desperately runs to escape. This is the excitement of Naughty Dog's Uncharted series at its finest. This is easily my favorite set piece from any of the Uncharted games, and in my opinion, rivaled only by the train sequence from Uncharted 2. And he's talking about the train sequence towards the end of that game, not the beginning. The cruise ship is iconic. I mean, I love the cruise ship. And I actually like the whole ship graveyard dockside thing too. A lot of people don't like that, but there's something in this section that's insane to me. And this is where the technical fidelity of Naughty Dog comes in, is that it's all waving.
Yes.
The entire time. Do you have any idea? I mean, I know you do, but just out there, the royal you, do you have any idea how hard that is?
That's insane.
To make it look like that? And to have it all working so that you're having gunplay. So think about it, like you're fighting, everything's moving like this, and then you're all fighting, bullets are all coming at you, and it all works. It's a complete feat of design. It's amazing. I hate when people say like, oh, it's a little slow here and stuff. Like, this is the fucking coolest part of the game. You know, the whole lead into the cruise ship is in my opinion, I know the Ramses thing is random, and it is. I don't care about Ramses at all. I don't give a fuck about that character. But just going through all of this, even if they had to justify it somehow, someone had an idea of like, what if we put everything on moving water? What if the next step is this instead of the snow and the mountains and all the shit we've done in the past, the jungles? Now we're on the open water, and a cruise ship splits in half and sinks, and you're in the room, and then the rooms turn 90 degrees, and then the rooms turn 90 degrees again when you go back to it. I mean, I think that I was really excited to ask you about this because I love this section of the game. And when I was watching the gameplay of it, I was like, I remember this beat to beat. When you walk into the cruise ship, the fucking chandeliers, dude. I mean, there's so much that makes this work. There's so much work here. The like the boat moving and the chandeliers going, and then the chandeliers hitting into the glass and going back, and everyone's talking, there's dialogue, and they all have movements and paths, and it's all happening, and there's creaking, and the rain's hitting, and my God, what do you think?
It's such a feat, man. I love this whole section of the game like you do. I love you calling it the ship graveyard. That's a perfect description. When you first encounter Ramses, you break out of your captivity, you're in that wharf. First of all, that's when the combat starts getting difficult, and the enemy AI ratchets up, where you have to form some sort of strategy with the docks, with the cargo containers, swimming in the water, climbing up on the various ships, and sort of forming your approach, because the bad guys they're gonna go at you, and they're gonna come en masse. And then sort of going to the docks where everything starts waving, you better stock up on your ammo because your aiming is going to be way off, to when you enter the ship and everything's sort of ebbing and flowing and going with the tide up and down. It's such a fun experience, and it's so thoughtful, and it's so immersive. It's like you forget you're playing a game after a while, and an older game that's a decade old. It's pretty crazy, and it all comes to a head when you're in the ship and it's turning on its side. And you know who played a lot of this section? Graydon did. He played a couple of chapters of the game. He was in and out, but he's gotten really good at third person shooters because of his Fortnite. So he jumped on. It's crazy though. He came in, he was just like, all right, what does what? How do I reload? And he was just off to the races. He was like amazing. And he ended up doing a lot of this part because we went death for death. And if he didn't die, he just ran off with it.
Like the old days.
Yeah.
Except you would tell me, oh, there's a secret down that pit. And then I would jump into it.
Yeah, it was the same thing. And dude, but what a wonderful idea to kind of do it and just to make it happen. What, like you said, what a feat to make this whole thing interactive. And you know what the other thing is that's really struck me about this? I know they tried to make this one feel a little more open world. I don't really get that because I think this is pretty linear like the other two games. But I love the fact that they make it feel large in scale. They make it feel like a big scope, but they still keep it linear. You still know where to go. You don't really make a wrong turn. So the choreography and the navigation is very planned out. And they do it with color, and they do it with movement, and they do it with timing, and they do it with dialogue and all the tools at their disposal, but they do it very well in this game. It's a masterwork of that. And the ship is the epitome of that, where you're inside and you kind of know where to go. Not that it's always easy. You're going to have to redo it a couple of times and figure out, how do I hang on to this door? And now I'm standing on the toilet sideways and stuff like that. But it's fun. And again, also, I think like the first two, the level of challenge is just so. It's really, really done to be engaging, but not overly frustrating. You're you want to rise to the challenge. You don't want to rage quit. And again, this is playing on normal. And of course, once you get good, you could do the more hostile modes, hard and difficult and all that kind of super difficult and all that kind of thing. But I love that. And, that's part of the equation that I think goes overlooked a lot with these games, is that you want to make it engaging, but not frustrating for the player. And they're very good at that with this. And I think maybe the best so far, in where the level of challenges increased, I think, in 3, which is good because we've experienced the first 2. Right. So we're ready for a new, maybe a rise in difficulty. But I like the fact that you don't want to walk away from it. The experience doesn't turn sour because of the difficulty.
I think you hit on something really important about game design and why you make a choice and why the choice, unfortunately, is becoming more and more open. But there's a real advantage to linearity, and it's to anticipate everything the gamer can possibly see and do, or at least to better anticipate it. We often remark about Bethesda open world games and how they break and how you kind of have to give it to them for even trying, because of course they're going to break. They break in the most random ways. You can't anticipate, even in really deep QA pools, how and in playtesting, how is this thing going to break? And I always tell that story about New Vegas, which is technically an Obsidian game, but the game broke for me in such a way where and this is the random shit that happens in these games. You have a cowboy hat on, the cowboy hat. If it breaks and you have already gone, because if you get hit enough, it breaks, in quotes, and you go to the Vegas Strip, you can never leave. There's the game breaks down like that in random ways, and you have to figure out how these things tie into each other and why that happens. Like, why did that even matter? You have to go into why does it matter that I have this thing equipped? What is this thing attached to? What is triggering all of these things in this game? And that's its own situation. And that's why I think open worlds, they obviously take a really long time, but why I think they should be more seldom released. And why I think some companies just should get away from doing open worlds, because some companies are just doing them way better. Like I think Guerrilla with Horizon Forbidden West is like, wow, that's an open world. But when you make the decision to make a linear game, like you said, you can anticipate what the player is going to do. You can draw their eye. And I'm glad you brought attention to the great art of drawing one's eye, because it's done in clever ways. There's just an extra light here. There's a splash of color there. Sometimes it's really obvious. I always make fun of The Last of Us because they, in the beginning when you're getting chased, they must have had playtesting where people didn't know where to go, because in the fucking game, there's a spotlight on it and then like yellow tape, like swinging in the wind. And I'm like, it looks so stupid, but that's why they put it there, because no one can figure out where to go. And that's because that's a more open part of the game. So when you choose linearity, you get to it's like being a filmmaker in a way. It's grander than that, but you get to every frame counts, and you assume the guy's going to go here. You're heat mapping, play testing, so you can see where people are going and what cover they're using. And then you know that you should make all of your one-off animations and maybe your encounters in this way. And that creates something that's fine. You'll never, in other words, a game as fine as an Uncharted game in the open world will never happen. That's not to say that we don't love open world games. I mean, I do. I play open world games all the time, but they're never going to be fine like this. And I think the closest we've ever gotten is Red Dead Redemption 2. And that tells you a lot, because that's 4 years ago. It's not like that game just came out. So, and what was so interesting about that game is that it's empty. It's alive and full of life. Everything belongs there, but it's not like some guy like waving you on the side of the road being like, hey, I got a task for you. Kind of stupid shit like that. So does that vibe with you? I think that the art of the linear game is dying, and that's a bummer, because there's a place and time for it. And I think the place is often, or the time I should say is often, the place is almost everywhere. Why wouldn't we want that?
Right. I think you make a great point. I never really thought about open world compared to linear, in that with linear, the benefit is you could really craft the experience to the most minute detail and really build a very specific experience, which there's a place for. And some people say, well, open world games are just the opposite. You craft your own experience. It's choose your own adventure. And I understand the benefits of that too. But like you're saying, there's a place for both of these things.
Right. And the open world comes with a sense of deadness, because think about it.
It can.
Fallout 3 was a game changer for me. When I played Fallout 3 in 2008, I was completely melted in my mind. I couldn't even believe that game. I mean, it's awesome. But the reality is you walk out of the vault after the intro, and the choice you can do is you can go anywhere. So if you're the game designer, how do you stop that from happening? Like, what do? You draw them in certain places, and most people will take what's called the golden path, right? And this will get them from point A to point B to point C. But the reality is I can go anywhere and do anything I want. I don't have to go to the main story. And they do things like the enemies are a little harder. Think of Dragon Warrior. What happens when you cross a bridge? The enemies get way harder. That's a signal to you that you're not supposed to do that yet.
Right.
And the game signals that to you in some ways. You're going to run into more and more difficult enemies. But if instead of saying the player picks up the controller, he moves down the hallway and goes into this room, and so what's in the room? In Fallout 3, it's okay, the player walks out of Vault 101 and he can go literally anywhere he wants. Now what? And you just do the best you can to make everything interesting, and it's kind of telling you a story, but it's dead. Yeah. It's not active. It's not bringing you from beat to beat, and I wish we would embrace that more, because I actually feel you could see a world where these games are really important, I think, to turning other developers off to this, because I think a lot of them don't think they can do games like this. And so, like, why bother? I think there's a piece of it there. But you could have seen it going the other way, where it's like, don't you realize you guys copy everyone and doing everything? Why wouldn't you try to copy this? And I think it's almost a sign of respect, because goddamn, what happened 5 years after Fallout 3 came out? Everything was an open world. You know, what happened 5 years after PUBG came out? Everything was a battle royale. But what happened 5 years after Uncharted came out? Nothing. I mean, nothing as far as Uncharted, because it just cleared its lane. So it is very interesting to think about that.
That is really fascinating way of looking at it. I love that. I really do. Yeah, and the trade-off for open world is maybe you crave exploration in games, but it's weird because the point of being satiated or satisfied or landing on a solution or a resolution is untold, and maybe, I don't know. Open world, I'm like you though. And I think it comes from being an old school gamer too. Like, well, I want something finite. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I do too.
Could be 40 hours long. Could be a Final Fantasy game. I don't care. 40, 50 hours long, 60, but I want it to end at some point.
Exactly. Like the golden path being its own thing, but that there's got to be some way to feel like you've completed it or seen it all. And I get that it's much more of a PC, and I mean personal computer style game that migrated over. That's from their world, just like shooters. And some of our stuff has gone over there, seeing how PlayStation games are selling on Steam now. It's like, okay, so some things are migrating over there. Yeah. I love open worlds. I just don't want everything to become an open world, because there's only two ways to make an open world well now. You either have to have a massive workforce, which is expensive, or AI tools. And both of those are going to be good solutions to make open big worlds. But it makes you wonder, why play a video game more and more that's being tailored by AI knowing what you like, as opposed to someone handcrafting? This is the kind of shit I think about. When they're in the hideout in the game, they keep showing a shot of Drake at a table, and behind him you can see like a kitchen. And there's like shelves with items on it, and there's like a counter, and you can't really tell what everything is, but you can tell there's like some ingredients and some blah, blah, blah. And the reality is that some artist made all of those assets, and then some designer put them all there. And there's some sort of intent to that. And you can say, well, that's the way it is in every game. However, the game frames it so that you have to see it. So they know that they had to do that. But there's no reason you're ever going to have to see much of anything in Fallout, except for the golden path. So yeah, it is. I think everyone has been, I don't know, carried off by this clarion call of open worlds. And I think people are suddenly starting to realize this is not, we don't only want this. We don't only want choice and agency. It's not all about that. And so I think this game shows that off a lot. And I want to talk about another sequence in the game, and Jacob does as well. He wrote in and said, what did you guys think about the Desert Mirage sequence after the cargo plane crashes? Personally, I was blown away by that wide of shot of Drake scaling the massive sand dune for its incredible scale, only to realize I was controlling the scene in real time. That is a cool moment.
So good.
The whole sequence from him stumbling into Elena's apartment to the near end sequence when he kind of finds himself more put together in the desert after that long trying sequence. It's good shit. Them kind of finding an agreement with each other, Elena not going with him and then kind of busting through and helping him get on the cargo plane. The cargo plane fight is iconic in and of itself. I mean, that fight is replicated in the movie that just came out.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. It's like an iconic fight. And I love that. And then he goes down into the sand and walks through the sand, all this and all the hallucinations and shit. There's a lot of shit here. What did you think of all that?
The desert moment, the whole desert moment of after the plane crash, when Nate's sort of abandoned in this massive, vast desert, really spoke to me because, again, this is somebody who enjoys the combat, the fast pace, the third-person shooter elements, being engaged in all of that. I love how quick everything is, but I was so impressed that the game and the designers weren't afraid to just let this moment breathe. You're not doing a lot. You're not solving puzzles. You're not necessarily exploring. You're not engaged in combat. You're just sort of marooned in this desert. And the scale was so impressive of pulling out and just controlling a little Drake who's walking very slow and he's exhausted and he's baking in the sun and he's completely parched. And then you find out after you think you gain a little control that you're going in circles, and then you're seeing mirages, and the game just lets you experience this. There's no flop sweat for saying, okay, are people going to tune out? Is this too slow? Again, just in doing something that's cinematic and something that you're controlling, but you're barely controlling. Right? Like there's not a lot to do for those moments. You got to let it breathe. The game's kind of on a timer, in fact. And then all the way until you finally find the abandoned desert settlement. So there's a pretty good deal of time, maybe an entire chapter or most of a chapter where you're just kind of doing nothing. And that comes at the tail end of some of the most frenetic moments of the game. The cargo plane battle and falling on the, vis-a-vis the parachute crate.
Mm.
All that intense stuff, hijacking the plane, getting in there, doing the combat, the crates busting out. The airport battle is really hard and really difficult. You leave Elena behind. It's very frenetic. And then you get to that point where it's just very slow paced, and sort of backing those moments up to each other was just so cool. And the game just knows, like, there's another thing that I realized later in the game, and I didn't mind the puzzle solving moments in the game. For instance, I love the one that's a little more interactive where you kind of got to go in a certain sequence of the floor tiles. In fact, I would love to see more physical challenges being incorporated with the puzzles like that, where, your kind of movement and agility and control is part of the solving the puzzle. I think that would be really fun. But the game knows when to stop the puzzle solving. Like the puzzle solving stops at a certain point in this game. It's not tied throughout, because when things get critical and you're looking for Sully and everything's coming to a head and you're right on the bad guy's heels and you have the whole hallucination moment and things are getting ratcheted up, you don't want to stop to have to solve puzzles at that moment. So
yeah, like flipping through the journal,
Right, you don't want to be flipping. You can't even access the journal at a certain point, which is really smart. Just leave that part out. That's for the first half of the game. So the game knows when to build those moments, and the desert thing was really a big part of that. And shout out to the way the wind blows and it's forming those very specific rounded sand dunes, and the environment is very appealing, but also very vexing and vast. And you really feel for Nate at that moment. He finally finds some shade underneath that red rock, and you have the VO of the poetry over the top. And it's very cinematic. It really feels like a film. And the game just gives you so much. It's not all puzzle solving. It's not all exploration, platforming. It's not all third-person shooter combat. There's other things in this. And I think that's what makes it so impressive. I've never really experienced a thing like that, especially in a quote-unquote action-adventure game where you just stop doing everything for 25 minutes. You're just kind of trudging, crawling through the desert on your last legs. Shout out. I mean, it was just an amazing thing to experience and a complete delight.
Yeah, I think this is what Justin Richmond brought to the project, the director of the game, who is a designer on Uncharted 2. And what's interesting about him is that he went to Riot, and I was looking at his Moby Games page. I'm looking at it again right now. He has no credits after Uncharted 3 at all.
Oh, wow.
And so I don't know if it's because he's working on League of Legends and there's no way to really show that in that or whatever the case might be. I don't really know, but I know that he went over there. Of course, both Naughty Dog and Riot are in Santa Monica, California. But I think that I think the game is noticeably different in this regard from a cinematic point of view, not only in the framing of some of the shots and all of this, but yeah, these sequences that dare you to slow down the pace and do a little something different. You can look at it, sardonically and say like, this is a padding maneuver to add hours to the game. And it probably is, but is a lot that happens in a game, because otherwise you're just going to go from sequence to sequence. Like having Nate just run like I love in games when you're supposed to do serious shit, but you can actually do whatever you want. Like, so in like Skyrim, you can like jump on the guys' heads while they're talking to you and then just like jump off them and they just never react and all that kind of stuff. And it's fun. And I like that. There's a place for that, but that's a more open world thing. I like games that force you to slow down, like no running here. Oh, we're going to pan the camera a little bit for you so you can look at things. That's what I was saying earlier when you're going in, I think that town in Yemen, it would be cool to watch that sequence slowly so you can see everything you are missing. And also, again, see everything the way the things are seamed together. There's an awesome shot when they're in Syria, and it looks awesome, but it's like of the night sky with like the turrets, but there's a turret in the background that you can tell is not in the geometry. It's too far away, and so it's just a flat part of the background. And it's fun to be able to see that stuff and be able to stare at it, but they never really let you stare at things for too long. And they're constantly challenging you to get down with the cinematic nature of the game. This is almost kind of blasé today, but God, on PS3 in 2011, midway through the PS3 era, getting a little late in the PS3 era, it's still something new. And so, yeah, a huge shout out to the whole cargo plane desert sequence, the fighting and him finding his way towards the end. And Hidari Shitaro wrote into us about the ending. He says, "Hey there, massive meat Moriartys. What do you think of the game's ending? Sully's fatherly nature with Nate, that's never been fully addressed, finally comes to the fore. And Elena and Nate's relationship is shown on screen for the first time with success. It was a great sense of satisfaction for me with the conclusion of a game franchise I essentially grew up with. While I love Uncharted 4, part of me wishes the series was allowed to end here. Thanks for the best podcast on the internet, and go on slurping that well water." I won't. I'm afraid to.
Thanks, Adar.
I think it could have been satisfying to end here, but Uncharted 4's story and ending are awesome. So I'm glad it didn't. But we probably won't get there on KnockBack because it's too new, but you should definitely play Uncharted 4. I mean, just play it for fun. Wait. But what do you think of the ending? You know what? One of the things I really like about this and the story is this double fixation on rings, this duality of, and it happens multiple times, the fake ring and the real ring, Drake's ring and the wedding ring, et cetera, and so on. So there's this comparison that I think is interesting and obvious, but I like that there are hints. Like you see the wedding ring on her hand, you wonder like, oh, is she married to someone else? Then it kind of comes out that Drake and her are married and maybe still married. And there's a lot there that we don't know about. And I like that they bring in Elena like that with a little bit of drama. And I like that Elena plays the strong, but kind of fake strong woman where she's like, yeah, I'm helping you out. There's nothing to it. I'm wearing this ring because it helps me here in this very masculine, misogynistic part of the world. And I'm going to help you out, and I'm keeping an eye on you because you're under my care and all of that. But there's like an extra layer to it with her, with all of it, which is cool. And ultimately she becomes incredibly concerned about him. So the end, as I said earlier in the show, is the game allowing things to wrap up nicely. Like what else could you ask for, really? Then everyone's alive. Nate and Elena kind of respark their dying relationship. Sully's alive and goes off on his own. What do you think of the end?
It's, you want to see these characters, especially these three, succeed. You want to see them well. You really love these characters. I especially love Sully and Nate. I really do. And so it's a very satisfying ending, and it's a little sentimental. And like Indy, like Spielberg, it's okay to be a little sentimental in an ending. Mm-hmm. There's part of me with this sort of action adventure, treasure hunting, thrill seeking, caper type model that is a little surprised that things don't end on a cliffhanger of some sort. But there's also a lot of wisdom in that, because when you go to the next iteration, you could just do whatever the hell you want. And that's what they've done with this series so far. You know, you could have a complete detached launching off point in the next iteration, just put a pin in this adventure. Later on, it's going to be a new adventure, and we could connect it however we want, however little, however much we want to the past chapters. So I think there is wisdom in it. A cliffhanger ending would be fun, but a satisfying ending like this is also cool, where maybe Nate and Elena kind of resparking their relationship. Maybe there was some sort of very mystifying estrangement, I guess, of some sort, after the couple years passed from the previous adventure. I love the way Sully professes his love outright for Nate and just basically calls him his son, because, you know, these are two charismatic, cool dudes. They're always joking around and, you know, being wise asses and everything like that. Sully calls Nate out for that at the end. But, you know, it's nice to have that moment of just professing their love for each other, which is, you know, sort of fun, especially Sully for Nate. And that official taking him under his wing and just saying it in so many words instead of, you know, us ascertaining their affection for each other. And, you know, it makes you wonder where the next iteration is going to go. There is something, I think, a little strange in not playing out or fleshing out what happened between Elena and Nate. But I realized also Elena's a cool character because she spends some of this game calling Nate out for things that you could understand. Like being very protective of Sully, you know, basically saying like, Nate, you're dragging Sully into these things that are endangering his life. He's an older man. You know, how much is too much? How far is too far? She says to him at one point, like, you know, when is this going to end? Like, you know where the lost city is and Marlowe doesn't. Isn't that enough? And it's really not. A lot of this is about Nate's obsession, and we love him, and he's a lovable character, and he has a lot of heroic, noble traits that make us root for him. But he also kind of blinded by that obsession, where he's not only putting himself at risk, but the people around him that care for him, that want to protect him, he's putting them at risk as well. So I like that they kind of fleshed out Elena's character with those conversations and saying things to Nate that we're kind of angry about on one hand, like, stop, like, he's a treasure hunter. We want to see him go on crazy missions. But on the other hand, we understand what she's saying, especially when, you know, where Sully's concerned. And then I thought it was really touching too, like Sully's obvious love for Nate in this. Not just in the ending, but throughout the game. I think they really kind of brought that to a head and fleshed that out. And the characters really feel rich. These aren't the most unique characters on the face of the planet. You're not rewriting history here. This is not astrophysics, but the characters just feel so grounded and they feel so real and consistent, and their personalities feel fully formed. And I think, yeah, by the time this is over, I'm just like ready to jump into the next one. And I'm also wondering too, like, I have to say, and you may be able to speak to this, Kyle, like, is a proper Uncharted 5 ever going to happen?
I think so, but it's hard to say what it will be without spoiling the fourth one. I think it's. Okay. I think after you play the fourth one, it's obvious what the fifth one is.
Okay,
and I think everyone that knows will agree with that. So you'll see. But
that's interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
The fourth one is its own product because it's all jumbled up, and you know, I've admitted, I think kind of over time as I've gotten further and further away from games media and embargoes and all that, now that I kind of don't deal with PR and don't get early access to games, that I was just rushing through so many games just to play them because I had to move on to the next game, and I don't do that anymore. And I know Uncharted 4 suffered because of that in my mind, because I couldn't play it the way I wanted to play it. It's like, we got to do the spoiler cast. We got to, it's like, oh, fuck, shut up.
You're on that clock.
Right. It's like the constant, it's just, that's so valueless. And so I have to give Uncharted 4 another shake. And I think I might do that soon, just because I want to play Lost Legacy as well, which I never played. And people have been begging me to play that, which is the spinoff. So Yeah, and I think there will be an Uncharted 5. There is a rumor that an Uncharted was at one time maybe in development, maybe is in development, not at Naughty Dog though. So it's unclear, but we know Naughty Dog has a lot of power within Sony, and when they got wind of the Last of Us remake, obviously they basically stole it away and finished it themselves. So who knows if they would let anything happen outside of their studios walls. I don't know, but I'm glad you brought up Drake's obsession, because I do agree with you. It's fun to see that. It's, again, that's not uncommon in the adventurer trope fiction vertical of storytelling, having the obsessed protagonist, but it is a part of it. And you often wonder, like, why are you so obsessed? But you get a little more into that in the fourth one, I guess. So
that's good to know. Okay.
So yeah, that's all right. Is there anything we didn't touch on, Dig, that you wanted to talk about with Uncharted 3?
I just wanted to clear this up, and maybe I'm missing something. What is Drake's deception to you? I know what it is to me, I think, but I'm not 100% sure. I would think that at least part of it, and maybe I'm missing part of this too, is that that Marlo talks about when Drake's captured at one point in Yemen. She talks about the fact that she's done her due diligence and she's really investigated into his past and found out that he grew up in an orphanage. He was basically dumped off by his terrible parents, and he basically adopted the Sir Francis Drake name on his own. That apparently, allegedly, there's no actual real lineage there. So that was kind of his deception, the whole thing with being part of that family and part of those origins and the ring and everything like that. The only other thing I could think of is him, Drake or Nathan, sort of, I guess, kind of playing out the same quest that Sir Francis Drake, his idol, the man, the legend, played out in the past, where he was on this treasure hunt, or this hunt for a lost city and a claim, and to forward the cause of England and the Queen and everything, and then found out that there was this sinister thing at play and covered up the entire thing and even lied to his liege about the whole thing. And Nate was basically doing the same thing in not so many words by saving the world from this threat. And the deception, and that was the deception, that it wasn't a treasure hunt this time. It wasn't hunt for fame and glory and treasure. It was something else. So what do you think about that? Because I really thought that was going to be pronounced from the beginning, and it was something that I was asking myself the entire time.
Yeah,
it wasn't so clear to me.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that I've ever really even thought about it. I guess I would think about the double entendre of, inherent in the name Drake. So you're talking about Nathan Drake and Francis Drake, and so the deception of Francis Drake to Queen Elizabeth, and then that would be one of the deceptions, or the deception. And then the second deception would be, I don't know. I have no idea. I guess I really never thought about it. I don't know.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But what's in a name? It's a wonderful game. And I do love, again, bringing it, like you said earlier, bringing in T.E. Lawrence and just kind of fusing this history together. It's quite fascinating and really well done, rapidly done, expertly done, available on PS3 and PS4. So you can play it in both of those places. And so that means you can play it on PS5 as well through the PS4 version if you'd like. And yeah, that's 2011's Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception, as voted on by the audience. Glad we could finally deliver that episode. Dig, we end every episode of KnockBack with a joke, a dad joke specifically.
Of course.
Hit us up.
All right, my friend. So fun. Had a great time with the game. Now, Kyle, how many telemarketers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
I feel like I've heard this one, but I don't know the answer. Let me think. I don't know. Tell me.
Just one, but he needs to do it during dinner.
Very funny. I don't know if I've heard that one after that. All right. Very good. Very good.
Not too bad.
All right, my friend. Well, it was good to talk to you. Good to talk to all of you out there. And thank you for being here with us. We couldn't do it without you. Patreon.com/laststandmedia. And of course, new merch, laststandmedia.store, if you want to check that out as well. Free shipping on all stickers, including KnockBack stickers.
Nice.
So check those out. And we'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.